What's up, everyone, and welcome to the next video in our review series for single player campaign. Today, Peter and I are going to be talking about Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, a game not many people have heard about, but we have lots of thoughts about it. It was a really fun experience and not one I was anticipating, and I'm sure Peter has similar thoughts. But we'll be using our same formula that we've used so far, going through our major four pillars and at the very end giving it a grade from each of us. So without further ado, let's jump straight into this thing, because
Yes.
once we get the juices once we get the juices going, I think a lot's going to come out here. And I did a little bit of reading earlier today to kind of like refresh myself on some names and get some takes other people have about the story, because it can kind of go one of two different ways. So
Names by themselves in this game occupy that 2/3 of my brain, and everything else gets kicked out.
just kind of have to ignore like all of the god names used and all of the tales that get told.
Pretty well,
I guess, because this game is heavily based on Norse mythology. So yeah, let's jump into it. Let's start with story, as we always have. And I guess we could do a recap, just so that when, I don't know that this will be a debate, but there are definitely a couple angles you can come at this story from. But let's so Hellblade is a third-person action game set in some sort of Norse realm. I'm not sure we actually know the specific area. Senua, the main.
I think it's around Norway, like on an island off of it. I know they said that Senua is Pictish, like a barbarian tribe that lived in Norway at the time.
Right.
I think it's in the 7th or 8th century.
Okay, I didn't know any of that, and
they didn't tell you for sure.
Maybe there were some dialogue bits in there that you could have parsed, but there's a lot to digest in this game. You play as Senua, who has been cursed with the darkness. We don't know much about the darkness, but Senua is on a journey to, as far as we understand, free her lover, Dillion, from, I guess, a sort of purgatory state. He's been killed. She's carrying his dismembered head with her. She's trying to get into the underworld to, I guess, set his soul free, is how I understand it. And I think a lot of the story people believe is metaphorical, but as far as you, the player, understands it, you are traveling through this horrifying, hellish land, journey into the underworld to confront Hela, and I guess by taking his head into the underworld, you're sort of freeing him from the darkness or something along those lines.
Is it right? Like Senua's, she's just going for it. And if you're like, well, how's taking a head into hell gonna do this? Then you're thinking the right thing, because you don't know. You only know what Senua tells you for almost the whole game. So if it doesn't make a lot of sense,
that's because it doesn't, and because it's a bit metaphorical. But along this journey, all of the gameplay, you're fighting these like spirit, ghost, demon monsters, and we'll get into that a little more during the gameplay section. But at first, you have to basically kill two gods, a fire god and a raven god, which lets you pass through a gate to continue your journey towards Hela. And then Hela fucking whoops that booty real quick when you first encounter her. And you get set on. Yeah, that's the whole story there.
The end.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. But you get knocked off a bridge and like wash up on shore. Unclear, directly below.
There's a lot of physically getting knocked straight down, and then you wake up like sort of laterally again, and you climb up.
Yeah, I guess it's almost like we got knocked into a different world. But during this segment, post first encounter with Hela, we find this tree where, I forget the name of the sword. There's a sword that was like crafted by the Norse gods, and we go on these like 4 or 5 journeys to gather shards of this sword so that we can assemble it, because it is capable. It is
Gramr grammar.
grammar. It is capable of killing gods, so we plan to use it against Hela. So we go through some sweet vignettes where we experience and face fear, and it gives us a lot of the background on what has happened to our village, why we were kind of cast aside, what happened to Dillian, our lover, and how did we meet him. And that's why it was kind of part of, or at least maybe my favorite part of the game, is just because we got all that exposition and I really enjoyed it. But once we've gathered the pieces for the sword, and assembled the sword, that's when we go into that weird like world made of flesh, right? And there's like arms
Oh yeah,
trying to grab you.
A very iconic like hell zone.
Yeah. So we assemble the sword and go into that zone and fight a bunch more demon soul monsters before emerging victorious with our brand new awesome sword. And we start trekking towards the mountain, which was very reminiscent of God of War, the 2018.
Was it a mountain? I was really struck by that thing. It looked like a giant horse made of like driftwood.
No, you're getting ahead of yourself. That's later.
Oh, it's a different thing. Got it.
Yeah, this is the mountain where the like dragon, quote unquote, in the darkness lived, and it ended up being a smaller monster. But you're basically in a
disjointed. It is. You just like there's a lot of like waking up like where am I?
Yeah,
you're in a different hellscape every time.
But you're in this mountain. You have to stay out of the darkness, or this monster will kill you. There's a segment of the game where you have to like backtrack to light a lamp on fire so that you can make it through a certain portion in time without getting killed.
Oh yeah.
And I spent like maybe 5 to 8 deaths.
You walk through the thing and then you get it.
Yeah. You like run through a waterfall and it turns your torch off and you're sprinting as hard as you can, and it's like set up so that you can make it just far enough to get to this bridge. And if you did it right, you would have lit this torch that's like across the bridge and you'd be fine and you can go to it. But my dumbass didn't backtrack and light the torch for the first like 5 times. So I would sprint to this bridge, make it, and then try and sprint into the darkness again because I assumed there would be like another point you hit where you'd be safe. And they're just
found the backtrack pretty soon.
It just never was. I had to Google it. That was the only time I ever had to Google anything. I was like, I'm gonna die from the darkness. One thing I should say is, while all of this is happening, anytime you die, it tells you kind of towards the beginning of the game, if you die too many times, your save will be permanently deleted because the darkness is like traveling up your arm, and if it gets to your head, they're like, fuck you, we're gonna wipe your game because you failed. And so every time you die, and I died mostly from stupid shit like running into the darkness or falling off a tree, you kind of respawn and see the darkness crawling up your arm. And it seemed like that was mostly there just to spook you, and I don't think it can actually delete your save, but I obviously did not test it.
Right.
So anyways, we make our way through the mountain. We eventually fight the dragon and kill it. And from there, I'm trying to remember, this is the part where we start like moving towards the wooden horse thing, right? Because we're trying to get to hell. I guess we like emerge from the mountain, and there's a couple puzzles. We cross a bridge.
You take a staircase up and you're like, you have to do some of the puzzles. And then you cross the bridge. And then it's kind of go time, if I remember.
Yeah, then you have like 3 platforms where you fight like endless waves of people, and eventually on the final platform, you fight people until you die, basically. Reminiscent of the end of Halo Reach for anyone who's played that. You're basically just fighting swarms until you have to die. But at the end, I forget how we Senua has a moment where she realizes like she's holding on to the past and needs to let go, and by doing so she defeats Hela and comes to accept her darkness, and it's all really metaphorical. I think that
the metaphor finally connects for Senua, and pulls her out of her own mental darkness a little bit at the end, and it becomes more of an emotional, personal letting go than the fantasy quest we've been on.
Right. And I think the whole story is basically her journeying to move on from the death of her lover and accept her darkness, which in this case is psychosis. So throughout the entirety of the game, you have these voices talking in your head. And when you're first starting, it seems like it's voices of people who have died, because you have moments where you're communicating with a friend of yours from your village who's like basically helping guide you through this journey, as well as your mother. But a lot of the time, it's just random voices who kind of like warn you when there are enemies behind you, or
I thought it was
sometimes.
I thought it was different cadences of Senua herself's voice for a long time, but it wasn't. It was all kinds of voices.
Right. And so when you're first starting this game, you kind of buy in to the mythos of it, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm playing some character who's been cursed by this darkness, and I've been cast out of the village because the darkness has caused a ton of horrible things to happen to the village, and including my lover being murdered, and I feel responsible for that, so I'm going to try to free his soul from hell or whatever. When in reality, I think a lot of people read that as her darkness is the fact that she's mentally ill. She hears voices because she suffers from
Yeah.
psychosis. Her village was probably pillaged by like Vikings or something, because that's kind of a theme
Yes.
that
The Northmen.
the Northmen, the Vikings, they came in.
There are a couple of concrete pre-existing story elements, but there are very few that really affect the details of the story. And the rest of it is extrapolated on by Senua's terrible mental state and all these hallucinations.
Right. And I guess this is at a time where obviously they don't understand mental illness, so they do think it's like a curse from the gods, and
Yeah.
they want to blame her for bad things that happen.
From what I can perceive, while we're still talking about story, what they lay out to us via flashbacks at various points of the game is that Senua was raised in a village with a father and a mother, and her mother had similar mental issues, similar strong psychoses, and I believe her father had her burned at the stake,
Yep.
in front of everyone, and it was horrible for Senua, and that's kind of started things going. She had inherited her mother's issues and had psychoses as she grew up, and her father kind of tried to squash them down and locked her up and isolated her so that she never knew anybody. And things just got worse and worse until she met Dillian. Um, and things started to open up and get brighter a little bit when she was actually able to connect with another human being. And one day, I guess when she was gone or something, the Northmen raided her village and killed everyone and tortured and destroyed Dillian's
Yeah, they
body in
like
a
flayed
horrifying
him
way.
and almost
Yeah,
like crucified him as if he were like an angel, and
it
his
was like a it
skin
was like
was.
a hereditary, like a traditional Viking,
It was fucked up.
disgusting, like
Let's make it
like a
clear,
depraved ritual.
this
Yeah.
entire game is supremely fucked up throughout. The imagery in this
Yes.
game is horrifying, and
Yes. So
most of
that
it is,
happened,
yeah,
and that I think what directly preceded the events of the game.
correct. And she cut off his head and brought it with her for some reason.
Yes.
And
Right. Dillian's
her
head.
and the head like falls off of her in the mountain and like plummets down into the eventual pit where you fight the dragon and you recover it. And so I think the like biggest discussion to be had about the story is, do you buy into did you want to buy into it as this like metaphor for these realistic events, right? The darkness is her mental illness, these demons she's fighting are the Northmen, the Vikings, and like I don't know how to bring the gods like Hela, the fire god, and the raven god into and the
Hmm.
dragon into that metaphor. It's not clear to me what she was actually fighting at that point.
I
Or
felt pretty. Go ahead.
so there's the metaphor side, right? And I think that's the side most people take as far as understanding what's happening. Or you can just kind of buy into this like fantastical world where you are actually traveling to free his soul from hell, more akin to God of War, right? Where these gods actually do
Hmm.
exist and you're fighting them. And it may not be what the developers were going for, but it's kind of like a cooler experience. And
It's pretty cool, visually at least,
yeah,
and
because everything they set
really
up
just
is so interesting. And the idea
yeah,
that she's being communicated with by the dead doesn't like, I
doesn't work.
understand it like lessens the point that they're trying to make about mental health. And like a large part of this game, the developers Ninja, they care a lot about mental health. They have a segment
Yes,
of their website dedicated to it, and
I
this
would like to
game.
actually talk about this before we continue into
Sure.
anything else. I think it predicates every single thing in the game. The whole point of Hellblade is a dedicated, committed game to playing as a person with severe psychosis. Uh, with a real honest and horrifying look at it. Um, Psychosis specifically being you hear voices and you perceive things that aren't there, often scary things and that are not based in reality. Not really kind of depression or anxiety, but psychosis and delusion as well. They are called out. And every step of the way is kind of painted in this stuff. Before you even start, there's a disclaimer page saying this game features heavy psychosis. If this is the kind of thing that you ever have experience with, we encourage you to either think twice before playing or like look at these resources, et cetera, et cetera. And we also would like to advise if you have any negative experiences with these things and are afraid of being, of anything like that happening if you play this game, then think twice because it's a tough one if you have anything like that. But like you said, it affects the story. It affects the narrative of the game. Because all this fantastical stuff happens to you. A man whose head is made of fire and wicker, a raven god who kind of dances around and becomes intangible. Lots of things becoming intangible, so on.
Mm.
One possibility is that it's real, which I think is the less. I
Certainly
don't
not
know.
what they were going for.
I think they were heavily implying that it's not, and I actually think it's the less exciting of the two options. And the other option you said was a metaphor, and I think there is a lot of metaphor, but I think more specifically, Senua is imagining it. Her vivid psychoses are like creating these complicated monsters in front of her, and when they attack and when they cut her, we feel it. Her psychoses manifest in a lot of varied ways, including blurred vision, duplicating runes and figures and characters, uh, sometimes just blackness, her senses like going out entirely. And the watching that feature that I told you about is really informative about this because they put so much, the developers put so much work into this. They had like 5 mental health consultants on payroll the whole time, and they talked over and over with people with psychoses to draw from their experiences and tried to represent them as accurately as they could. Um, Even if it were a bad game, which it's fucking not, it would be hard to like look at this and not be impressed with the kind of labor of love that they put into making this.
Well, that's an interesting thing you brought up. So I didn't watch the video because apparently it's only in the game, and I uninstalled the game, so I didn't want to spend 2 hours or whatever re-downloading the 50 gigabyte game to watch it. So you watched
I'll hit
it.
you with knowledge bombs throughout.
And this is maybe something we should say for gameplay. The puzzles, you see these letters or symbols floating in the air. You have these portals that like perceive parts of
Yeah,
space that exist and don't exist. Those are also all rooted in like symptoms of psychosis.
specifically what I was alluding to was when you see the runes and when you have to go about doing the puzzles, that the rune floating around like that is a psychosis thing
Huh.
specifically. When you run through the hall with the beast and your vision is blurring past you and you can't see, that is a psychosis thing. A couple of cutscenes where Senua wakes up and it's just dark around her, or there are shadowy figures and she can't tell who or what they are, but she can hear their voice. Those are specifically drawn things. I'll holla out more if I
Yeah.
think of them. But
Wow. Yeah, no, I definitely didn't know it extended so far beyond the voices in the head and that kind of.
you would never like notice directly, but it's really suffused throughout the game. And
Clearly, I should have re-downloaded the game and watched this video.
it was very informative. Let's see. Yeah, I'll holla out more things if I think of them.
That
But
seems
I wanted to talk about that first because they're so. I never really think about. We talked about mental health a lot in 2021, but
not in 2021. This is the year of the meme stock.
it was. If nothing else, this is an educational game. I've never met someone with psychosis before,
Mhm.
and it sounds really, really horrifying.
Yeah.
The the in terms of the story that we go through and the journey, it is kind of this fantastical hero's journey with all these ups and downs, and it makes you wonder the whole time, like, is this just a hallway? Is she just like fumbling around in the dark in this mountain and swinging her sword at a rock wall this whole time, and then she goes down the mountain and there's nothing there, and then all the way back up? Like, is that actually it? And it happens to you while you're playing. It's like, is this happening to Senua? Does this happen to people in
Yeah.
real life? This is horrifying.
One thing I actually read today is like the demon soul guys that you fight are actually just like the Northmen or Vikings, and then the gods. So the fire,
Oh
raven,
yeah,
and dragon are actually just
the
like bear.
real people.
They're like bears. They're like
Oh yeah,
wild
yeah,
animals
okay.
that are attacking her, whereas all of the other encounters are actually people, and
So that's
everything else
another
that's
thing.
going on is her like
The
imagination
hallucination is a veneer, like over like a
over a
cosmetic
real
over
world.
things happening.
Yeah,
But you don't know. You're not gonna know. And that's a big part of the message of the game is like you don't know. You're floating without an anchor. And if you feel lost and if you feel kind of confused and you want more information before going forward, like now you know a little bit about what it's like to be someone with psychosis unrooted.
yeah,
Um, so what was I gonna say? So yeah, it could be that all of these things are just cosmetic, and you're fighting with all these things as you make your way forward. I can't remember what I was gonna say. Let's keep going.
that's okay. Yeah, and we should note that Senua is pretty good with the sword, and that comes from she like watched
Yeah.
Dillian training when they were first meeting. He was uh, practicing his sword work on like a hill in their village, and she was like
Hmm.
admiring from afar and eventually approached him, and he was kind and welcoming to her unlike anyone else in the entire village, sadly. Do you remember do you remember the name of her friend who died horribly and was telling all of the stories, and B, do you remember
Druth.
Truth?
Druth with a D. Druth.
Truth, right. How did they meet?
I don't. You mean in the game or in real life? Or in the
In
history?
real life?
I guess in the game, he just kind of came to her. He occurred to her, and he sort of said to her, "I will continue to tell you stories if you let me keep you company as you go through your quest." In
Right.
her
So do
like
you think that's just
imagination.
something she's like perceiving but doesn't exist?
I think it's alluded that he was like just a guy in her village that told stories.
Okay. So
Pretty
she's
much
just
just
like
a
recalling these stories that he told her when so
yeah.
there's 44 runes in the game, and when you go up to a rune and examine it, it tells you a epic part of or a segment of one of many Norse tales that kind of explain some of the horrible things that have happened in the world with the veil of mythicness to it, basically explaining it via gods and powers and
Steeped in specific Norse mythology. These are all, I think they're all specific
yeah,
tales.
and they're
Like
really freaking cool, but it kind of just like plays even more into her psychosis, and you got to wonder if like those stories as she grew up kind of molded her mind into what it eventually became.
yeah, exactly. I actually loved that. The Norse stuff is all specific, and it's like and it's culture that works into Senua's brain and her history, and her psychosis jumps off from there and colors in these pictures
Mm,
with, oh my God, horrifying giant man with wicker head and flint. Like it makes sense what you'd picture for a terrifying fire god, which is based in a story that she heard when she was a kid. So I
mm,
really loved that delta of culture and her own imagination kind of expounding from there.
mm.
Uh, and I listened to all the runestones I could find for that reason, which was
Yeah.
like 20 of them. I sucked at that.
Wow, yeah, there's so many. I was so sad. I missed like four, and
I got as many as I could.
apparently there's a different ending if you find them all. I wonder if it just like
Really?
tells you a little more.
I saw it shamefully when you walked through the door at the end, light up all around you, and I was like, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah, okay, I get it. Let's go. I didn't think that many
yeah, they
people.
don't just put them there for you to find. You have to explore like the entire area to
Yeah,
really get them.
you definitely do.
Oh, what was I gonna say? Did like how did
So,
the
was
how
it
did,
really happening or was it not? Um,
we can safely assume it was not, but it made for a hell of an experience. Like
I agree with that.
this game's story is really,
Let's see.
really cool.
I want to talk about some other things too that aren't about the plot, like overarching, I suppose. First, I want to talk about the writing, which I thought was excellent.
Yes.
Senua's kind of the only character there that we like, the only person
It's
in
like Druid and Senua.
Dillian and Druth, and
Druth.
Dillian pops in
Her
a
father too. Her father
her
is one
father,
of
her
the
mother.
voices she hears. Same with the mother, but the father's kind of a villain for the first
Yes,
2/3 of the game because he's the one who's putting her down this whole time, and he manifests as this like horrifying,
yes,
disturbing, deep voice that in one scene is herself, or she's talking to herself in a mirror, but the voice we hear is this like voice that personifies her father, and
yeah.
it's kind of fucked up because you can tell how much he has like deteriorated her mental state by
How
himself.
and you question how much of this did he incite himself just by kind of abusing her and pressing her down and
Well,
not
and it
giving
was
her the
kind of
like support.
the first point where you start to be like, okay, like this journey we're having, she's not afflicted with some mythical darkness. Like she
Yeah.
was cast aside and kept in a cage basically because of some mental issue. And
Yes.
from there is when it really started unfolding her past and
Hmm.
helping to
The moments you get with the other characters too, with Dillian and her mother especially, I found were just so great.
mm,
This game was a really, God, I love it when games do this. A really nice exercise in show don't tell. In that they almost go out of their way to obscure the other characters and make it difficult to perceive what they're actually like. But in the fleeting connections that we do get in Senua's memories, they're really sweet and they paint a really vivid picture. I loved Dillian. Every time
mm,
his face became clear and he spoke, you really ache for this guy and it feels like someone was finally kind to her. And there's somehow there's chemistry in these 5-second clippings between these people. And her mother's kind of messages to her, kind of inspiring her along the way. I got a little emotional once or twice when her mother spoke to her. There was something she said once about Senua getting rocked by the ocean and just begging for it to stop, and kind of reassuring her that eventually she would wash out and remember that the ocean was all around her and that it's okay. And like I can't
mm.
remember what it was, but I really loved it. So the
Yeah,
writing I thought was really strong.
agree, agree.
I also want to talk about uh, the darkness and the permadeath.
Okay.
Uh, I was scared. I was
Oh, me
the whole
too.
time. I was stressed out.
Here's my dirty secret. After falling off a tree twice in the Ravens den,
Yeah,
which really made me start stressing. I was like, there's no way it's more than like 10 deaths or something. Like, I'm fucked.
you
I
googled
Googled
it.
it. I
Yeah,
Googled it and I was like, and weirdly, there's like a couple links that seem to suggest it's true, but then eventually you find one that's like, no, we tried this and it's not
not
actually a
real.
thing. And
Yeah, I
it
wondered if you knew. I figured you probably did.
once
I
you,
didn't.
once you fall out of a tree twice, instead of dying to like the combat enemies, you're like, fuck this. Like, I'm not gonna
Yeah,
lose
I
my.
tried to handle the stress. I didn't. I went the whole game without knowing that it wasn't real.
Did you
As
die
you
a
were
lot?
alluding to, yeah, I fucking died a lot. I died like 10 times at least. Yeah. So what we're saying is the permadeath isn't real, and the game actually, like Patrick says, it stops you, and it's in a game full of show don't tell. It very explicitly says. The darkness will creep up Senua's arm. If it reaches her head, Senua will be lost to the darkness, and you will lose everything, all of your progress. Uh, in retrospect, it's kind of tricksy wording. I don't have it at hand, but there was apparently some rebuking of Ninja Theory when this game came out because of this direct lie to the gameplay.
Really?
They really wanted, and their justification is that they really wanted to, like, yeah, it's a lie. Like people with psychosis is a lie. Like everything around you is not there. So they kind of made the, I think, bold choice to get to feed you that lie and let it inform your gameplay in that way. Uh, and boy, did it, because I was so scared the whole game. But I was getting so close to the end of my goal, and I was like, oh, I really want to. I really hope I don't lose all my progress. And I was kind of looking closely at the progress it makes up your arm, and
Yeah.
animation like stops it. That like lines it up with milestones in the game and
Yeah.
stops it from progressing past this. But
Yeah.
I was like, trying to tell.
Pull out your ruler.
I was starting to suspect later on, but yeah, it's interesting. I also don't know a lot of games that like directly lie to the players
Yeah.
and kind of violate that
That's true.
didactive style.
I don't
So
even like. Are there any games that even?
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
permadeath is a thing in games,
Yes,
but
yeah, it is.
usually it's something you voluntarily are aware of and sign up to do as like a challenge. You're not just like, time to try this cool new game I heard about. Oh,
Yeah,
better not
and
die.
I was gonna be feel so bad about myself if I lost every
I know. No one wants to
I
start a
worked
game.
so hard, and I got so good at fighting these motherfuckers, and I thought I was gonna lose it all and embarrass.
I
Because
know.
you really do die to some dumb shit. But okay, let's keep talking about story, because I don't want to move on past any segments of this.
No, and so one thing I want to say is I think so the game is broken up into segments like pretty clearly. Like you have your Raven guy section, you have your Fire guy section, you go to the sword bit, which is broken up into like 5 sections, and all of them are
Yeah.
distinct and tell a different thing, and they're all done equally interestingly. And some tell more serious bits, some tell more touching bits, and I really enjoyed the way it was broken up like that. And
Yeah.
it kind of kept me on my toes. I didn't know what the next thing would. The next section be more puzzly? Would it be more stealthy? Would it be more actiony?
Hmm.
It broke it up in a really nice way, and it made for some real like it never lulled for me. I know you said that section was a little slow for you, but
Yeah.
because there was so much cool story unfolding in each section and it was all so different, I was constantly on edge to figure out what it was going to tell me next because I was curious to figure out what is real and what is actually happening. I have no
Yeah.
idea, and like why am I where I am? And
I feel bad that I complained to you at that part. I think honestly, I was just letting the stress get to me. For one thing, because the game was going on and I was worried about losing my save,
mhm.
but also because it was getting scarier. This game is not a horror game, and I want to talk about that too. I'm gonna write it down first.
Well, that can be during
Uh,
gameplay maybe.
yeah, but it's a horror game. But this was the time when I was really. I remember telling you that I was like, I'm not that stressed out by this game. It's okay. And you were like, this game's stressful. And it was at about this time when I was starting to, I don't know, you go through the swamp one and you like
uh,
kind of fumble through, and then these like large elephant woogly wooglies come and graze your ankle or whatever while you're waiting, and it's just like, ugh,
yeah, I know that
no.
section when you like can't see very far in front of
Yeah,
you and there's
it was
this like
scary. I had a couple jumps, and so that I think was getting, and that's maybe why I didn't like that much. But it's like liking it and liking it, like
yeah. You're not having fun, but it is you
I
appreciate
felt
it.
that. Yes, and I don't know. I liked each one individually. I guess I have a slight dislike for like a larger task that's broken up into parts like this, kind of the arcane sanctuary of Diablo 2 or something, where
It
it's like
didn't feel
sitting
like
in.
a fetch quest to me because getting the like we weren't actually really retrieving an object. When you go through each of the segments, you kind of just complete them and are teleported back to where you came from. And
Hmm.
it was almost like reliving memories, right? Because we
Yeah,
obviously weren't being teleported into different worlds. She was just kind of like passing out at these sections, having
yeah. She just cold out on the
yeah,
ground.
having her memories manifest in these really like weird and horrifying ways while
Yeah,
you go around solving puzzles in these beautiful landscapes. And it
this
I
was your
just like
favorite
how it
part, right?
presented itself. Like you said, it was show not told. It wasn't like someone just sat me down and told me all of my stories. I basically had to relive the story of Senua through these really unique and interesting landscapes, and I
Yeah.
thought that was really cool.
That was your favorite part of the game, right?
I think it was. I think that section was my favorite part.
I'd like to talk about my favorite part before I
Sure.
forget, which actually fits into story now, which is definitely going to stand out the most to me as time passes from this point. I think, which is the beginning of the game,
Hmm.
is really I was just knocked out of my chair. It was incredible.
You're talking about like when she's in the boat.
Yeah, you
Hmm.
start the game in just like over a misty lake, and you're creeping in behind on someone in a boat who is Senua, who can barely you can barely see. You have headphones on. The game directs you to put on headphones, and the reason for that is because of the binaural recording they did in the development process of the game. This was crazy. This was probably the coolest thing um, out of the featurette. But they for the voices that flicker at you throughout the game, they recorded these by having a series of kind of local actors do practice their best frightening crazy voice, and then they would put a special setup of microphone in the center of the room, and they had these crazy like ear-shaped microphones, and they would have the actors kind of walk around and move around and perform their lines such that they would flicker in from all directions at you.
Huh.
And if you have headphones in or speakers in, it changes the way that you interpret those sounds.
Right.
They advise headphones because I don't know. I think that's just the way that it's
Well, if it's coming out of
made.
like one speaker on a TV, all the sound kind of comes at you from one direction. Whereas if you have
Yeah,
it in the headphones, you have like certain voices in this ear and certain voices in this ear, and they like
right.
will swap.
Exactly.
And it really sounds like there's people behind you, just kind of like constant. It's like you have two devil or a devil and an angel on your shoulder, and they're like whispering
Yeah.
whether or not there are things behind you and ahead of you, and
Right.
there's like, will she find it? No, she won't.
So the right and left like orientation makes it so that you can hear behind and in front of you,
Hmm.
and that's persistent throughout the game. But because you have headphones on, I don't know, it just forces you to put yourself into a more focused. It's not a game to play like on your Switch or in the car or whatever. It
Yeah.
forces you to
It is on
put
Switch
the
now, by the
headphones
way.
on. Oh my god, it and commit to the game is what I'm saying. Focus on the experience. It's one
Yeah.
of those games. And when I did that, when you start that game and your volume is cranked or whatever, and I was joking about this when we started this, but it's the fucking ASMR game. Like they you can hear every like crack of a lip and every
Mm.
like little kind of half wispy chuckle and everything. And you start going in and the voice, the narrative voice, maybe Senua or her, I think her mother's voice, kind of addresses you as you approach Senua, and she's like, "Who are you?" It doesn't matter. Um, and you hear the voices start to come in as her mother details and gives you a frightening picture of Senua's mental state and her surroundings as she's paddling in. It makes it clear that she has Dillion's, like the shroud of Dillion's. This girl has a severed head on her hip, and she's rowing in, and you can see corpses
Yeah,
skewered,
everywhere.
hanging, as beautiful light filters through them, and it's chilling as you paddle this log. It's not even a boat; it's a log with a dent in it through and it's haunting. And it kind of runs credits by you that don't
Mm.
obstruct you. It's like, and it takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes, like 5 minutes at most,
Yeah.
and that is just amazing. When there's no fat, no time wasted at all, it paints an incredible landscape of a picture, with kind of motivating performances and kind of it's a beautiful game, which we'll talk about later, and all this
Yeah.
stuff. Best part of the game for me
Yeah,
right
and we'll
now.
get to this at the end, but it's hard to believe that this game is not AAA based purely on like the quality of every
I
aspect,
know.
including the story. So let's talk a little bit about the end. So at the end, when you, I guess, win, quote unquote, when Senua has her realization that she needs to move on and continue living her life, she talks to the player. I don't know if you remember this,
Yeah,
but she
I
breaks the
want to talk
fourth
about this
wall and
too.
is kind of like, haha, I have emerged victorious, because you think you lose, right? Like,
Yeah,
you get
a few
overwhelmed by
times throughout the
demons.
game. Yeah,
You get overwhelmed by demons. It looks like hell is won. She like stabs you with a sword, and then I guess she has her come to Jesus moment, recognizes that she needs to move on, and that this whole journey was kind of not what she herself needed to become whole. And she looks at the camera and has this moment, and then is like, "This isn't the end of my journey." They're planning to make a sequel, by the way, and it's a
yeah,
little weird and off-putting, just because this whole time you've been so alone and you have been Senua, and then she looks at you and like identifies the fact that you are
yeah.
not her. How did that all?
The game addresses you directly a few times at the beginning, like I just said, at the end,
Yeah.
like you're saying, and one other time when she goes in to get grammar, she turns and looks at you and says, "I have to go get this sword that Dillion left for me. Will you come with me and help?" So there are a couple of times when they
Yeah,
do it,
I guess I
so
forgot that middle
they
time.
establish it's a kind of almost a throwaway moment like this. They establish a precedent of Senua knowing that you're there and addressing you, and I kind of like the way that it ties back into this ending because um, it establishes the whole content of the game as Senua's denial process. All of the color and all the bosses and the monsters are, a coping mechanism for her to understand that she can't really do anything and that Dillion is dead. Uh, and that's life. And you can't go down to hell, and you can't kill a ash woman who's holding him captive or trade out yourself. Senua's sacrifice, like Senua's sacrifice, is to go on living her life,
Mm,
like just like anybody who's lost somebody has to do. You can't go to hell and sacrifice your life to trade out for somebody.
right.
Like it's an indulgence, and the end of the game is her accepting that. And I think the most crystallized moment of this is I don't remember how they did Hella, like the ash Hella fading away into Senua holding the head, and Senua drops Dillion's head off a cliff.
Sure. And
So I
those,
appreciate it.
yeah, those moments where she does reference us, it almost paints the player as like one of the voices in her head, and
Yes.
like part of the reason that she's doing what she's doing and isn't sure of herself and doesn't feel in control, which
Yeah.
is an interesting way to do it. So
I think they're
maybe,
really important moments because the whole time that she goes through all this, I don't know how to explain this. It's like it's such an interesting way to treat the player, as you're controlling Senua, but you're also, it's like you're in a back seat. You are 5 feet behind her, like
Mm,
you are watching and playing. Because sometimes she turns around and looks 5 feet behind and looks at you, and when she does, it's like, you know that I'm here, Senua, almost like. And all the other stuff when she, when you're playing the game proper, and that's not, that wall is not, is there, I guess. I don't know what I'm trying to say. You know that it's not that way, that she knows you're there, kind
mm,
of. But also there are a million other voices, so
yeah.
her perception is off. Let's see. I also want to talk about. We talked about or directly addressing the player. You read my mind. I want to talk about Senua herself, the character.
Mm,
I want to have a brief little call out for what I thought was a really strong character. I like her a lot for the same reasons I liked Aloy
mm.
from Horizon Zero
I
Dawn, who
think
are
she
very
is.
similar characters
Yeah, I think she's
in a few ways.
almost more well done than Aloy.
Yeah. I want to comment that she's, I don't know how to denote this. She's a very androgynous character.
Mm,
Um, and I guess I appreciated that, because I don't know of another character like Senua, and and who represents themselves with like a total complete lack of sexuality in the game, and someone you really feel for because of their really kind of the terrifying circumstances under which she proceeds. And she keeps on chugging the whole game, despite an incredible performance of
mm.
of being really horrified and traumatized by everything around her. The person who portrayed Senua, uh, and did the mocap for Senua and everything, was like a writer for the game who had
Really?
never done anything before,
Wow.
and she helped write the game the whole time or something, or some other kind of not as consequential role. And they were trying to find an actor, and this girl was really integrated into the process of like creating Senua. And by the time it came to start doing it, the director was just like, yeah, it's you for sure. Like you're just the perfect match for this
That's
character.
interesting. You have all these fun tidbits I don't
I,
know.
I told you to watch the feature.
How long was
um,
it?
it was half an hour or so.
Mm.
And of course, there's just this, I don't know, incalculable. She's so scary to look at. This girl just looks. It looks like the Scream, that Edward Munch painting, at all times, and it does a lot to really
Yeah, her
put you
face,
in this horrified
her
world.
eyes are like painted blue. Her hair is
Yeah,
always just like a mess. She's
she has barbaric war paint all over her, and she's all kind of grossed up at all times. She has lime in her hair that like
man.
dreadlocks all the way
The
down.
graphics
Yeah,
are so insane in this game.
they're insane. Let's go ahead and jump into our next
Sure,
zone.
yeah. All right. Closing thoughts on the story. So I adored the story. I think what they did is really cool, and even especially with the information that you've given me regarding the puzzles also being a part of the psychosis is super awesome. But as a dumb smooth brain person, I also want to say just playing it as like a Norse mythological epic journey, if that's all you want out of it, it will also deliver on that. If you're not
Yeah,
interested in perceiving it as a commentary on psychosis, which you should because it's
I urge
super
anyone
cool.
to do, to
Yeah,
do that.
you absolutely should do that. But this game
Obviously, you don't want to
also,
know it with the sound off.
the themes and stories that are told and like the atmosphere and everything is so well done. Like I got more drawn into the stories and tales of these Norse gods in this game than I did in God of War. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
insane. Like the storytelling is way more impactful to me.
Props to Druth, the voice actor for Druth, and his really
Oh my god,
committed,
yeah.
extreme, insane storytelling
That
of
dude is
these.
just a Viking. I don't
I was
understand.
like crying, like running through these halls, and he's shouting, "And the world will fall." I'm like, "Leave me alone!"
So I think it worked on all angles, all axes. It was a really cool game, and it's wild how hidden it is.
Yeah, we found this game because we needed we needed another game because his Golden Sun had. So that's why we didn't play Golden Sun this and Mega Man this month, is because he got fucking shanghaied by some shippers in India or something, and it didn't come until like yesterday. So we were like, okay, we need another game for January, and we did our usual roulette, and I had one slot to fill, and I think I Googled like good video games,
Good game, no one know.
and someone on Reddit described this game as Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, 10 hours long, 10 hours of gaming bliss. And I was like, okay, I gotta hear what this dude thinks gaming
And
bliss
Peter
is.
stopped there because I then went and watched the trailer and was like, "This game looks horrifying," and he was like, "Oh, is
I
that
didn't know.
so?"
I just put it in. I was like, whatever. And it won our roulette and our little dual bracket
Peter's
thing, and we ended
Peter's
up
games
playing it.
always win.
Yeah, they always do. Patrick still
All
hasn't won the roulette.
right, let's move on
um,
to gameplay because
sure.
the gameplay is simple but elegant, and so it
Yeah,
kind of you can break the gameplay down into three things. I think: exploration, puzzle solving, and combat. And the exploration is a little whatever. The environments are gorgeous to walk around in, but there's not much to find other than the runes that tell the stories, and they're worth it because they're fucking awesome. So we'll focus mostly on puzzles and combat, I suspect. But you should know when you start this game, it doesn't tell you how to do anything. There are never any like
yes.
you've learned how to do this. It's more
There's
like
no heads-up display.
yeah,
You were just out there.
you gotta pause the game if you want to know.
Yeah,
It has all of the controls laid out in the pause menu. So
yeah.
I
You'd
was
think that would be hard, but I found it just kind of fine. Like I was like,
no,
okay,
it
pause,
worked
pause.
so well for me.
Yeah, I was like,
And
check
the
the pause menu. Okay, here's how I do it.
you
Like,
basically you have all of your controls from the beginning, with the exception of like two things, and
the
those
sword, I think. Yeah,
yeah,
the
the sword you
hammer
eventually
as well.
assemble has the ability to basically cut through
Light.
not
Let there be light.
yeah, it starts
I didn't really
glowing.
understand it.
So the enemies you meet and they scale up in difficulty. At the beginning third half of the game, they're always permeable. They always exist, and you can always hit them with your sword. But eventually, and you learn this in the first couple of bosses, these creatures are capable of becoming like
Intangible and
yeah, intangible. You can't
yeah,
hit them, and the only way to hit them is
ghostly
to use this focus ability, is what they call
lightsaber.
it. And, well, eventually the lightsaber, but before you
Yeah, yeah.
acquire the new sword, use this focus ability, which basically slows down time. Unclear how it works. You've got this little mirror on your belt, and it starts glowing when you have the ability to use the focus ability.
Yes.
And they
That
don't
I would
tell you
say is the
that.
hardest catch on that I had. Because you could see the indicators on the mirror like flashing and building up, and I was like, "What's going on?"
Right, and then the voices start going like,
Yeah.
focus,
Focus.
focus, focus, focus,
Senua.
focus.
I don't. I
And
am.
you're like, I don't know what that means because no one ever told me how to use this. But then you think about it and you think about what you've been
Yeah.
doing in the game. And anytime you come across a rune or a puzzle, you use R2 to focus in on it and to kind of zoom in. And so in this case, instead, it slows down time, makes the enemies tangible again, and you can like go into this flurry of attacks, almost kind of like Breath of the Wild when you pause time or do a parry attack, and you just kind of get to move at super speed while the enemy is stuck moving through mud. And it's really cool.
It
Like
is cool.
it's pretty much the only extra ability added to the game. The game consists of parrying,
Yeah.
dodging,
It is a
uh,
good game.
light attacks and heavy attacks. Those are the and then the focus ability. Those are the only five things you have in the entire game, and it is
And you can melee attack. Don't forget. You can F. I guess you never did this. You
F.
can F to get a good kick in there. And I use it
I
like a
never
shield
did this.
too.
Apparently, you can melee. I also pretty much I parried like 4 or 5 times. I spent the entire
I
game.
don't think I ever did. Okay.
Yeah,
I just moved like water, my friend. I just dodged
yeah.
every
I used the
motherfucker.
dodge and would do like a flurry of light attacks and do a heavy attack. And it sounds simple.
Before we talk into the combat anymore, because we go on all day about the combat.
Yeah.
But okay, I said there was no heads-up display, but that is not to say that there's no user interface at all. Because the game does help. It does the runes, like I said before. Like if you start a puzzle and in on the solution on a rune, the hallucinations intensify and kind of
Mm.
coalesce on where it is. So there's not nothing. And additionally, when you walk up to one of those spots, this kind of ring appears like a glowing ring
Yeah.
about where you're supposed to go. And I think it's important to clarify because there's not. It's easy to say there's no user interface, bro. It's just you're just out there, but it's not true. The interface is just very subtle, but it's there. And importantly, it's not just visual; it's the voices.
Yeah.
When you're now we're back into combat. When you're fighting, you have to rely so hard on this one little voice that says "behind you."
Well, sometimes
Because
later in the game it lies. It's not always telling the
Oh,
truth,
really?
and that's one of the craziest things, that these voices try to fuck you over in the game, and it'll tell you something. I'm like, I have one enemy left, and it's like, behind you, look out, and
I
there's
found
nothing there.
myself relying on behind you so much, and later on, it happens so much because the enemies intensify, right? Like they start
Well,
spawning
I
out
was
of
pretty
these
good at keeping
beds.
them all in front of me, and they can
Oh,
spawn behind
yeah.
you,
And
but my
especially
voices
the
were
last.
still telling me, yeah. Um, so we kind of just jumped all over the place. Let's talk. There's like two kinds of puzzles in this game. One is where you get to a door, you focus on the door, and it will show you 2 to 3 runes that you need to basically find in the environment around you. So it could be like a horseshoe and a weird H looking thing, and you have to go find a spot in the environment where you can kind of assemble that shape from pieces of the environment. And like Peter said, when you get to the correct area where you can basically look in the right direction and find this shape, the the shape starts glowing and floating all around you, so you know you're in the right area. It'll be like if you were looking for an A and you get to the correct spot, like a million A's that are red and floating will show up in the right spot. So you know you should just stop there and look around and try to manipulate what you see into that letter and then focus in on it, and it's kind of like, ta-da, you did the thing, you found this. And
This is another high level aspect of psychosis and delusion. Humans perceive patterns, but people with psychosis perceive these patterns and think they imply something. They mean more than really there exists. Like they might think it foretells doom, or that like every time I see a Bluetooth symbol in the wall, my day is ruined, or I don't know,
huh,
something like that. Um,
interesting.
so it's not as direct as the other things, but the general prospect of you find this rune in the environment is still connected.
So I'll say that this is probably the lamer of the two types of puzzle, but it did get you to explore the environment, and it allowed them to build things in really creative ways and use light, because sometimes the runes are assembled by combining structure with shadows, and I thought it was really cool to see how they did each one. Even if it wasn't necessarily fun, it was interesting.
Yeah.
The second type of puzzle I thought was really cool and reminded me a bit of the game Braid, which I'll get into, and it involved these portals in the world, and when you go through a portal, some aspect of the environment would only exist in that world, that version of the world. So maybe a bridge isn't
Yeah.
destroyed when you go through this one portal, but a ladder to get up to another area is gone. So the key to all of these puzzles is that parts of the environment are unaffected by the portal. So maybe there's a bridge that you need to knock down, and you can only get to it if you go through a portal that has this pathway connecting over to that bridge, and you can go push the bridge down and then go back through the portal to the version of the world that has the ladder, but that bridge that you push down manifests in both worlds. And the reason it reminds me of the game Braid, which I don't think you've played, Braid is
I played it.
okay, well,
Great.
like you remember, Braid is about manipulating time, and there are certain objects that are unaffected by your rewind time ability. And it reminded me a lot of that, because certain
Yeah.
objects that you're interacting with are
I
unaffected
hadn't thought about that.
by the portal ability. And I thought these puzzles were super cool, even if they weren't
Yeah.
necessarily that challenging. It got us. I think the hardest one was probably in the Raven world, and there was a
Oh my
space
God,
with 3 or 4 portals where you had to like basically flip.
That was the depth. I was like, okay.
You had to flip
Like,
switches
this
in the
is
right
crazy.
spot, and it took me like 10 or 15 minutes to get. And I just thought it was so cool. And
Yeah.
the worlds in the
And I
section where
spent a
you're
half hour.
assembling, yeah,
Minutes.
I think the section with the sword shards, it took all of, like, it combined those puzzles into really cool worlds where one in particular was this like castle, and when you went through this like world changing portal, it was like pouring down rain in one section, and then the other section it was like a
Yeah.
beautiful sunrise or sunset.
That was
And
cool. To whence Senua returned at the very end when she kind of accepted
right,
the
and it
darkness.
also had the rune puzzles in there, and it was just a really cool world, and you're like
Yeah.
chasing Dillian's spirit throughout it. And so the puzzles, they're not like challenging and mind warping, but I thought they focused mostly on the environments, and the environments are
Yeah.
gorgeous, and it was just purely enjoyable for me, especially as an interlude to all of the incredibly stressful combat.
There is one more puzzle aspect that you reminded me of that we haven't talked about explicitly, and it's a more pattern finding. But there will sometimes be a piece of the puzzle that Senua needs to rectify, where she walks in and it looks like a splintered, mirrored environment, like a debris floating in space, kind of like the mirror dimension in Doctor Strange.
Right.
And you need to look at it from the right angle, like into which it coalesces
And
into a staircase
focus,
or
and then it
something,
like
and then it like smooths over and
that's so
realizes
cool.
where
I
you would
wonder how they
actually
did that. I
land.
have no idea how they
It was
programmed
crazy.
that.
I can confidently say that that is the most graphically challenging thing that they included in the game, because every fucking time I tried to do it and I was Senua looking at it, my computer was rattling loudly like a tin can and had a bunch of coins in it. And I would turn and it would stop and it would be like, no, 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 and I'd turn away and I was scared and Apollo was like running away while I'm trying to
Joke's
do
on
it.
you. My PS5 is always really loud, so.
Joke's on me. You got me there.
So
I
those are
almost think it. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, those are most of the puzzles. They're really cool. Moving back into combat, like we said, the move set
Do
is
you like
limit.
puzzles and stuff like this? First, okay. This was kind of a
Yes,
I don't know, not a drag, but I'm not as big of a puzzle guy
me
in
neither.
games as much as others.
If the whole game was that, I think I would have found it boring. But like I said, it was just mentally challenging enough,
Hmm.
but also not stressful that it balanced with the combat scenarios really well for me. And it helped me to explore these beautiful environments, and it let them do such cool things that
Yeah,
even if it wasn't explicitly like cool gameplay, it felt like I was still discovering things, and
makes sense.
that was good for me.
I've talked a lot of praise about this game so far, but this is probably where I'll criticize it the most. And it's not even bad. Everything you said is true. It's maybe just not my thing quite as much. I don't know, especially Senua's slow running speed really
Oh
got
my,
me
it's
sometimes.
definitely a
Her
little slow.
leisurely jog, like she's
Her
walking
leisurely
through a.
jog is her sprint, and
I'm like,
that
let's
was tough.
go! Like you're gonna die. You gotta sprint fast, please. Even when she's in deadly combat, she's like, and it's like not fast enough.
Yeah.
And especially if you don't know the answer and you have to do laps and laps trying to figure out what it is. That Raven puzzle was the fucking worst, because I found out that the only problem was that I didn't walk up to the main gate and experience the like diegetic, oh, there are a lot here. And I had fixed the whole puzzle already. I just hadn't triggered the quick time event that got me through. I was so annoyed.
Well,
Uh,
I think as far as complaints go, that's pretty minor because
it's minor, yeah.
that is definitely the most complex puzzle. It's in the first third of the game, and then from there on, it just kind of mixes them in with environment traversal and never feels like a burden. Um,
Yeah.
but let's go back to combat, because I think the combat is
Yes.
something you would
Please.
look at and think that it is tacked on, but it's fucking
Deep.
great.
It's
Well, it's
great.
not even necessarily deep. It's so hard to describe
There's
game
a higher
feel.
feeling than you think there is.
Well, and it just everything registers right. And this is something that people praise Dark Souls for. I guess you could say it's kind of like Dark Souls, and it has a little it doesn't quite have hitbox porn, but basically all of the dodging is centered around timing. It doesn't matter if the animation of the enemy looks like it hit you. If you dodged at the right time, it will not hit you. You get rewarded for that, and then you get to counterattack in several different ways. And if you have the time slowed via your focus ability, you just feel like a complete badass. And the enemies range from like large lumbering guys with an axe who focus on heavy hits to this fast dual axe wielding motherfucker who
Yeah.
is relentless. And they all the game starts by throwing one enemy at a time at you, and they walk really slowly at you, and you're like, haha, I'm a badass now. And then they start spawning three at the same time, and they're still walking slowly at you. But eventually they introduce
Like they slowly notch up the difficulty with each set of enemies.
and it kind I would say, I'll say in the final third, once like it had kind of showed its entire hand, I think, in the hell level with where all the hands were. And that was where it first introduced just wave after wave after wave after wave of these varied enemies.
Yeah.
And the rest of the game kind of did that as well. And it's incredibly stressful. And when you're close to death, because there's no health bar, all the voices start screaming at you to get up, because you can spam X on the PlayStation. I don't know what you can spam, maybe mouse one on the keyboard, but if you spam a button, you get up faster, and when you're injured, you
Oh,
move.
like when you're like on the
When you're on the
ground.
ground, you can spam the
Yeah, I
button to
was
get
like,
back up.
I was flickering WASD really fast to get
Right,
up.
and
Yeah,
I appreciated that just because it did mean you were fucked if you got knocked down.
yeah,
And it punishes you by making you move a little bit slower and having your screen blurred. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I think the only complaint I can really have is that it showed it basically showed its ultimate plan and its hardest difficulty a little too early, and the final level is just kind of do that same thing three more times, fight this endless wave of people three more times, and
Hmm.
it gets a little tedious. Um,
I I had the opposite reaction to the section that you're talking about
the hell
because
section or the
yeah, the hell section where you're fighting the waves. Because the you're I agree with so much of what you said. So you can trust these controls. It's snappy.
yeah.
When you dodge and when you choose to you're there time. And I would still throughout the game I would still end up like taking axes and swords to the
Yeah,
face a lot of the time.
but you could
It's
usually pinpoint it on something you did wrong. Like
Yeah, it comes down to you. It does come down to you and how good, and you can improve at it. And over the course of the game, you do. And the hell section you're talking about, when you fight, like the whole time, you kind of wonder before you get there, like, man, I barely squeaked through that fight. I almost lost my progress. Like you wonder how much you could really take. And then as you walk up to Hela, they really start flooding at
that's
you.
not the hell scene. That's the hell scene is when all like
Oh,
right
the hell in hell, not the
right
in game
before you
with
get
Hela.
the sword and you're in the
Right.
world with all the fleshy
Yeah.
walls. It kind
Yeah,
of
that was not as good. That was
no, it's not. I think that section was good. It was the first time it was like, here's wave after wave of varying enemies. It's going to be stressful.
yeah.
You're going to be near death pretty much the whole time, and you're going to be
Mhm.
horrified of having to redo this whole section. And you get out, you're victorious, you get your sword, and that was really cool. And it doesn't really do that again until the very end. The section you're talking about with Hella, where it's like, platform 1, do this. Platform 2, do it. Platform 3, fight the 3 bosses over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Yes.
And at that point, I was like, okay, we've done this. I get it. We did this in hell. I'm now just kind of like, what is there anything else? Like, wait, I get the wave after wave after wave of these varying enemies thing. Is there anything
Okay.
else?
I wanted to I wanted to close in on why I liked that part before you fight Hela because it feels like you're so close. You can see her. She's
Mm-hmm.
there. You're so close to your goal. Um, and previously, yeah, you fight all 3 bosses in the game at the same time. And every time I fought those guys, I barely squeaked through.
Yeah,
Like, or
that
at
part
least I
was
couldn't
fucking
tell. Like,
ridiculous.
they were hard. And when I fought those bosses, I was like, man, that was great. I'm proud of myself for beating them, but I don't know if I could handle like more. And then at the end of the game, it shovels all of this stuff onto you, and you get through it. Like I had an amazing like moment where I was like, oh my god, like it was like a crowd of people and I was still dipping and dodging through everything and killing them and almost taking no damage, and I could tell it wasn't because like the game is taking it easy on you or anything. You
Mm.
just got that good with this set of controls, and at the same time this awesome music is playing
Yeah.
and all this inspiring shit is happening, and the voices that you hear that warn you and tell you you're going to fail also change tone. They start to say inspiring things like
Yeah.
throughout the game
Oh, it
during
was
combat, like you can
cool.
do it, you're a trained warrior. And it starts to occur to you like, are these voices just a part of me that like aren't really my enemy as much? And all of that kind of coalesced in the cool like running up to Hela and you were like making it to her, and I was like, this is fucking cool.
Oh, it was
um,
fucking cool. The only thing I'm trying to say is,
yeah,
like, as the game progressed,
conceptually it's
no, as the
like
game
super
progressed,
interesting.
its first trick to increase combat difficulty was to introduce multiple or different types of enemies who are more challenging. Its second
Hmm.
trick was to introduce more of those at the same time, and its third trick was to introduce wave after wave after wave. And I think it
Yeah,
introduced the wave after wave after wave a bit too early, because then by the end
in
it
the Hell
had,
part you mean with the reaching.
yeah, that was when
Yeah,
it
yeah,
introduced it, and then
I agree. I
it
think they
had
should
no
have
more
tried to
tricks up
find.
its sleeve for the final fourth of the game.
I think they should have tried to find something else for this like disgusting like red hell zone that
Yeah,
was maybe a little maybe registered emotionally a little stronger after the 4 shards instead of mechanically overcoming the differences.
sure.
This is the biggest place I have to criticize the game because it's a real it's I think the
Not the
developers did a good
puzzle.
job. No, not the puzzle actually. Well, I guess the criticism I have for the puzzle is that it's kind of prosaic and it's similar to a lot of other games.
Sure.
But the gameplay is where they have to do this challenge of like uniting kind of traditional combat with this meaningful emotional journey and tactile sensitive journey they want us to go on with Senua. And it can be hard. Like, in the end, you're just a person in a chair with a mouse and keyboard.
Hmm.
Tearing away the art and the sound and the skin, it's still enemies coming at you, and you have to try and get the player to forget that they're just sitting in front of a computer screen. And stuff like that can pull you out of it. And
Hmm.
I wasn't perfectly, integrated the whole time because of things like what you're saying. Like, that stuff did pull me out.
Sure.
I will say a combat criticism I have. Maybe I think this is a conscious choice they made, but the camera, like the way the camera works, it's always positioned behind and below Senua, so you're looking up at enemies that tower over you, which is intimidating. I also read that Senua has like a specific kind of sword stance that suggests an amateur, but then she like clowns on these enemies. It's interesting. But what I'm trying to say is you can get boxed in. Like, you're forced against this enemy, and your
That's
camera
part of it.
pivots.
I think that's intentional.
It is. It like pivots to face the enemies, and you also rely on a strafing dodge a lot of the time. And since it's forced up against this enemy, you can get backed into a corner and you can't dodge anymore.
Hmm.
And I guess
Well,
maybe
yeah,
that
it's just
what I'm
playing.
describing is like, yeah,
You're like, I don't like that they
being
made
backed
this
into a
part
corner.
hard. Well, I don't know if
Yeah,
you noticed, you can change which enemy you're focusing on, and I got screwed by that a
I
couple
did
of
not notice that
times.
at all.
Yeah, it'll pivot which one you're locked onto. So you needed to be conscious of that in case like the one on the
Good to
right
know.
was closer
Good to
to
know.
you than the one on the left. So if you
I
didn't
was
notice that,
definitely
I
getting like
imagine the camera fucked you more than it should
I
have.
could see. I would be focused on like a nobody, and I see this giant dude swinging. I'm like, no, dodge him, not this. Don't dodge into the X.
I know
Uh,
if you. I imagine the combat was much harder than because I would like focus on certain like you focus on the dumb guys from the beginning who are easiest to kill before like I always saved the shield guys for last. They were the only ones I couldn't fucking figure out how to just like
yeah, they're you
instantly
hit them and they're
murder.
like, ha ha,
No,
sucks.
I figured out a way to cheese them on PlayStation. If you dodge to the left twice, you can then immediately get in a short or a light attack, and then
That
you
makes sense.
dodge. So you just dodge left twice, light attack, dodge left twice, light attack. So you're just like spinning around him and just hitting him in the back once.
Speed of sound, yeah.
Yeah,
You do
I
get a real feeling for Senua as this like Bruce Lee type, really fast, like dipping around these
I
stronger,
mean,
slower enemies. It's
whenever
pretty
you use
cool.
focus for sure.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
want to undersell how
The giant
cool.
stop.
Yeah, I don't want to undersell how cool the focus ability is because like when you use it, these like white particles kind of and letters assemble
Right. Go
everywhere.
watch it on YouTube right now.
Yeah, and you are just like slashing, and these guys are like slowly moving different positions because you're like fucking them up royally. And
Yeah.
it's in the as far as boss fights go, you had to use it to kind of get over the hump of their like
You
second.
have to.
Well,
So often you have to use it to get
all the
through.
bosses had like a second phase that required you to use focus to overcome whatever bullshit they're using, and it was
Yeah.
really the boss fights were really cool, and they were all really different. The fire boss was a little easy, but the Raven guy he was like an acrobat straight
He
out
was
of the
hard.
circus with
I
these
barely squeaked out through that guy.
flying. I think he killed me once.
Timing was very hard with him with his spinning throw blade,
Yeah,
getting the
and
right
then the
window.
dragon, it was more like a beast, was really
The
cool.
beast. It was the beast.
It like
Yeah.
used the darkness, and you had to use your ear headphones to figure out where he was coming from and point yourself at him
Oh,
so
you
that you
did?
could
I
dodge
just kind of like
correctly.
wheeled around to try and
No,
catch where he could run
if
fast
you
enough.
focused at the right spot, it would kind of like vibrate, and you would
That's cool.
hear him louder.
Oh, it would vibrate. My mouse doesn't fucking vibrate.
Yeah, it would let you know which direction it was going to come from, and all the boss fights were really cool. I don't know that I super loved the like wave after wave of shadow versions of the bosses, just because it kind of lessened the impact of killing them in the first place.
I do think creatively it was a little funky, but mechanically I liked the feeling like, look, you can overcome this that I was talking
Sure,
about before.
sure.
Which is and I like it when that stuff connects thematically to the story of you can overcome this whole thing,
Sure.
Senua. If you like the focus a lot, I want to shout out to leaping stab. That if you start sprinting and then use your mouse attack, you do
Yeah.
a jump and a cry, and you
I
immediately
avoided
get
using that
staggered
at
from
like
it.
all
Oh,
costs
I
because
love it. I could like
no,
chain it into shit. It was
once
fucking
you
great.
like engage with the running, you're like kind of locked in for a couple steps, and if there's like a guy like winding up with his axe, you're just fucked.
I liked it because I could get away from axe people faster that way sometimes.
I wish I had
I
watched you
also
play. It sounds like our combat encounters went
experience
a
was
bit
different.
different.
Yeah. I also
And
really
that's
like
kind of
the
cool, right? I bet there were people out there who used the parry like nonstop and
the
were owning
parry.
people.
Zero
Yeah.
parrying, all dodging for me.
Yeah.
The last thing is the lightsaber. You said that you start with almost a full set, but you gain the ability to charge up a glowing light sword when you get grammar. And I never really figured out exactly what this.
Well,
Conceptually, it's like light
it's
can defeat the
no,
darkness,
it
but I was
served the
like,
same focus or the same purpose as focus. It allowed you to make contact with enemies who
yeah,
had left this plane or whatever.
physical
Because,
plane.
like I
For a
said,
while, I thought it was an insta kill. I thought it was, I thought it
no,
would
but
kill
one
the
of
crony like, what pow, see ya.
all right,
But that
so
was not it.
you can tell your focus is charged because you have that mirror on your hip and it starts glowing when you have it. You don't have it all the time. It takes a while to charge up. I think you like accrued focus by successfully dodging and avoiding damage. When you have grammar, you could hold a button to like charge it up into a lightsaber, like Peter said, and because you're holding a button, you kind of lose access to your other moves, but you gain this like wild spin move that you can do instead to avoid attacks.
Do that.
Did you never dodge
No,
while
I
you?
just charged and just like
No,
handed
if you like were holding it up
and
and
Jack the
charging,
Ripper.
she would like pirouette left or right depending on which side you want to dodge, and then you smack
Oh,
them.
fuck,
It
bro.
was so cool. I can't believe you didn't do that.
Spin move.
So clearly, there are some downsides to not explaining moves to the player, but it worked for me.
I'm pretty sure they said use this to defeat the darkness when you get it, and I was like, okay, what was I doing already up until
Focus.
focus? You're going to die. You'll never make it. Music and sound.
So I think we agree. The gameplay, it appears simple, but it is actually really
Yeah,
responsive and satisfying.
you
And
could really expect it to be a weak point in a game that focuses so hard on narration and the story. And where
right.
they
And I haven't played.
They really didn't drop the ball.
I haven't played any Dark Souls games. I don't think you have either.
Yeah.
But if people find responsive combat with uh, dodging being rewarded and learning the moves of your opponents, this game will resonate with you, even if you don't kind of develop. It's not an RPG. You're not going to gain moves. You get one extra weapon the whole game, but it never felt stale to me, and that's partially because the game doesn't overstay its welcome and is constantly introducing new enemy types and uh, varying environments to fight those enemies in. And it just nailed it for me. It was a really, as stressful as it was fun. And
Yeah,
what else can you ask for from
it's a great experience where the stress starts getting carried hand in hand with the feeling of getting closer to your goal, which is really like, good job. Like that's really what we hope for from our games.
All right, you said music sound.
Maybe the most innovative use of sound specifically I've seen in a long time in games.
Yes. Definitely
music-
wear headphones if you're going to play this game.
Yeah. Yes. Did you wear headphones?
Yeah.
You did, right?
Yeah, fortunately you can plug in headphones to your PlayStation controller, and
Yeah.
I can't imagine playing this game just TV. You would lose so
I think
much.
they recommend it, but I think they offer you the choice of using speakers. But I imagine, yeah, you would lose a lot, like you said.
And I don't have like a ton of like major points to say other than that the voice acting is incredible. The storytelling is amazing. The voices in your head are wild and drive the entire.
I think we just have to talk about that for a long time and the choice they made with that, because that's really the driving thing. Like what were the kinds of things that they said? The voices were always there. They were always there with you. Sometimes they quiet a little bit when you are just, I don't know, distracted with something else for one thing or focused on something different. But at times of stress, they come out. Like when you don't know what the next step is, if you feel confused, like the voices will come in and say, she's confused. She's never.
She doesn't know where to go.
No,
We're gonna die here.
Or something very concrete. They'll mimic thoughts that you as the player have right at the time.
Yeah.
They'll be like, pushing that didn't do it. Oh no, we're never gonna make it. Where do we have to go next? There's nowhere else to go. Like
Right.
stuff like that
Basically,
all the
anyone,
time.
anyone who's like along on a journey by themselves would experience.
And
And
of course, differing volumes and just like laughing, cackling, crying, repetitive, like not gonna make it, not
so,
gonna make it, not gonna like
yeah,
stuff like
so
that.
much
Crazy good.
laughing, like horrifyingly creepy laughing that you would find in a horror movie.
Yes, really, really makes it very tense. A lot of kind of spooky ambient noise too that I think goes unsung in the face of the
There's,
star player, which is the
yeah,
voices.
there's a lot of like screaming and moaning in this
Yeah,
game and pain. And
much like life.
yeah, particularly the segment in the fire world. There's this point where you're doing
Yeah.
a rune puzzle and you go into this area and there's this like unseen fiery monster chasing you through this room with things where if you run into them it makes sound and alerts this beast to where you are, and it's just this like it almost sounds like an angry mob chasing you, and
Yeah.
it's
Mm,
horrifying. I
it's
cannot
very
describe
scary.
how terrifying it is. You're basically
I had a
running through
hard
like,
time with that part.
yeah, you're basically running through what looks like a meat processing center with these like hooks hanging from the ceiling to alert the enemy to where you are, and you have to
Wait, is
like,
this with the beast? Where are you talking?
I'm talking about in the segment before the fire god. There's a wooden structure, and to solve one of the runes, you have to basically run through this
Oh,
room,
I
and
do
there's
remember
like
that.
a angry mob that got burned alive chasing you, basically
Yes.
trying to catch you, and if you get caught, you die. And it's so horrifying. That whole
Yeah.
segment has so much death and misery of people being burned alive. And in one point, Senua herself, you like think you've died. She catches on fire and bursts through the door that,
They do a couple of fake out deaths
and
in
you
this game
like
that make it
emerge
pretty
from
good.
this ashen body having like been burnt to a crisp, and you're just like,
Yeah.
my god, like the
It's
performances in
visceral.
this
It's
game,
very like if you don't like gore, it's
it's
not
hard
gore,
to,
but maybe don't play this game. Like it's very like
it's visually upsetting, and
body
it's
horror
it's
perhaps.
audibly upsetting.
Yeah.
It's hard to listen to. Like
Yeah, it is.
the things that are happening in this game are truly fucked up, and
I wanna backtrack a little bit past before sound that I something I wanted to say. And that's that interestingly, I would not consider Senua a horror game.
no, me neither.
Um, and yet it is horrifying. It's an interesting line that you can kind of perceive as you play. And there's this kind of distinct you can feel the hand of the developer not willing to push you into like you never feel like you're gonna get jump scared ever. Um, and it's this kind of trust that you have with the game to not violate that. And horror games distinctly do. Like your safety and your kind of attention, they will violate it and get on your nerves. Like we played Soma first, and that I had trouble getting through that game because I didn't know what was gonna kind of
Well,
happen to
it
freak me out
also
next.
gives you zero tools to defend yourself, and
Yeah,
Senua,
yeah, yeah.
obviously, we feel like we it doesn't jump scare you, but
It's this eeriness. It's like an eerie game.
yeah,
You're conscious of this horrifying shit that you're walking into, and you know you autonomously have to choose to keep walking into it.
mm,
So it's this interesting granting of agency to the player. Uh, and horror games, I think, operatively strip you of a little of that
a
agency
lot of
to
that
give them their
agency.
power. Yeah, a lot of it. And so while this game is maybe more like horrifying visually and audibly than many of those games, it still doesn't feel as scary.
Yeah,
And that's when it got more stressful for me was when they started to bring in a little bit of that violation with the like elephant walkers and the I don't know the beasts when you run through the dark areas and you just have to get through in time and you hear it growling behind you that stuff.
yeah, yeah. Anyways,
Music, I think there's not as much to say as there is sound. Like there's not a ton of music happening in this game.
no, but it's pretty striking when there is, and
Yes,
I don't
they
have
choose
like
to use it at diegetic, particular strong moments.
I don't have a ton of memories of it because it's not like a Final Fantasy score or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But
The biggest memory I have is from the when you're approaching Hela and you're so close and the music does
yeah,
start playing
and
when
it
you're
is
fighting those hordes.
so
It's fucking
cool.
good.
It is
That
so
song is
cool.
amazing.
And it's hard to be like, this music's good, and that be the main talking point, but that's all I can say about it. The game is so focused on sound that
Yeah. They withhold
I
music and value the currency of silence
right, you
throughout
run
the game.
around in silence a lot, and the only noise is the voices in your head while you're exploring these beautiful vistas. And I say beautiful vistas a lot. These landscapes, these worlds they've
There
crafted.
are beautiful vistas, no doubt, in this
Yeah,
game.
and we'll talk about that in a sec. But man, the game really, it uses like the suite of horror noises, right? Like these same
Yeah.
sounds could probably be placed into a horror game because of how haunting they are, but it leverages them to
Yeah, all I can
kind.
say is just play it with headphones. You know, that's the only thing I don't think we can touch on
It's hard to
in this game more than we
capture
have already. Yeah.
exactly. Sound is a hard one to talk about just because like you can't remember a ton of distinct bits about the sound itself, and it's something that has to be experienced, not heard.
Yeah, like forget about whether this game is fun or cool or even a game or not. It should almost be played just so that you can understand what it's like, because this is the only way that it can be explained. A movie would not do this. And
Right.
this is part of the reason that video games are so precious and important that they've come so far, because they this is the maybe the only medium in which this could be really expressed in this way. Uh, couldn't happen 20 years ago,
Completely agree.
and you know, that's why we like doing this stuff.
Yeah.
But what was I going to say? I guess just play it for yourself, if only as an educational tool.
Or watch someone play it.
Yeah, or watch someone play it.
I
That's
think that
another
would
great way
work
to do it.
fine because the sound should transfer through fine, but you won't have that same feeling as one of the voices in Sinua's head, one of the
Yeah,
people along with her journey. And that's goes back to the watching movie versus playing a game debate. It's so different to feel the stress yourself.
yeah,
And this game is so much about trauma and stress and isolation that it's so hard to understand the experience without taking the journey yourself.
yeah. Art,
Art. This game is so
art.
beautiful. I think this game is
Yes.
prettier than God of War. I think God of War is
I,
a little more cartoony. And I keep comparing these games because they're basically the same game as far as themes go. The new God of War is based in Norse mythology. You're fighting the Norse gods as Kratos, and they go into similar worlds. I'm pretty sure the mountain from both
it's hard
games.
to ignore God of War not
I'm
parallels, but
fairly
comparisons.
certain that the dragon tail in the mountain is the exact same as the dragon from
Yeah,
God of
they're all based
War.
on the same
It's all
stories.
based on the same stuff, and they are both gorgeous games. But this isn't made by Sony Santa Monica. This isn't some monstrous studio. This is some small studio who used Epic or the Epic Games engine, and it is such a stunning game. Particularly the character
Yeah,
models, Senua, Hela, uh, Dillian. They're all like it is
yeah.
unbelievable how good they look, and the textures on the skin and the mocap, the animation, everything is so good. I
I
was just
agree.
constantly blown away by everything. I don't. It is 100. Like there's no way anyone would just see this game without knowing what it was and be
100
like, this wasn't AAA. Like who could be
I
making this
too
game?
am confused at like how I had never heard of this game ever before this, and and they are an indie studio. They don't have the same budget as Santa Monica did when they made God of War, straight up, and
Hmm.
they made it look so good. Maybe it's just because they had much more time to do it, but it is really astonishing how much they made that
Yeah, I wonder
dollar
if they
stretch.
like purchased assets that were created by other people in Epic
I don't know.
Games or
Maybe
what. But
you know,
regardless,
maybe they're just really fucking talented.
yeah,
Maybe that's all there is to it.
all the
Like,
character models have to be them. All of the animation is them. The world that they built, even if they were using pre-made assets, like that
I
castle
will
scene I was talking about was so
I
gorgeous.
will
The
comment on
lighting in
this.
this game
The I think the visual graphics. I will say I think God of War is a little bit better. I think the recency bias is maybe influencing you a
could
little
be. I
bit.
need to go back to that game on
But
PS5.
I will say the concept and the atmosphere they chose to develop for this game, the directions they took for their characters, is so strong and stronger than God of War by a fair stretch. I think it is not derivative. It is very original. And it's really astonishing.
Yeah.
Hela, all the bosses are just like 10
Yeah,
out
the
of
entire
10s.
Raven world, the entire Fire
Yeah.
world, it's just
The beast especially, I remember feeling really like the combination of the concept of the beast and the graphics there were really doing it for me. Like it creeps towards you in darkness, and the parts you can perceive are rotting, and you can see tusks and maybe a dog's snout,
yeah.
and you can see a glimmer. You can see white points that suggest that they are large, very large eyes. Like they're
Mm,
too large. You can't see the eye. You can only see the glimmer, and
right.
it's fucking good.
Yeah, the
And that kind of decreases as it belches darkness around you.
right. And some of
um,
the character or the enemy models aren't necessarily inspired, but the first time you encounter Hella and she comes like crawling out of those doors on the bridge and is like this twisted
Simplicity defined at like a naked, featureless woman with black
who
eyes
looks like she's
conveying
been
it.
burned to death.
That's it.
It's just
That's it. That's
horrifying.
all it is, and it's so simple, but it's such a strong picture.
Yeah.
And extreme props to the environments, more
Hmm.
than amazing. Especially, I think the strongest concept I found, my God, was when you walk into the room at the end where Hela is, and as you approach her, not only does the debris around you, this was a really strong thematic connected environment that I really loved. The bridges around you coalesce into a clear bridge up to Hela, up to your goal as you progress, symbolizing your mental state as Senua coming together. But before that, even when you walk in, there are giant towering statues facing outward, and as you move forward, they fall apart and reassemble somewhere else in all across all of these giant placards, and you're running through this as this is happening.
It's so
It really
cool.
stuck out to me. It was incredible.
I got caught just kind of like staring at things in this game a lot. And
Yeah,
the way the environment gets filled up with those red runes when you're solving
yeah,
puzzles, or the wheel of runes when you're listening to the tales told by
truth.
Druth.
Yeah,
It's everything about it felt connected and felt like they were part of the same world.
I hesitate to say this, but this game loves to use corpses as a basic building block for
Yeah,
anything.
it's
Like
like
it
it's
has
like all right, we have our bricks, we have our stones, and we have our corpses, and we'll build
everywhere
everything.
corpses. It's the first like minute of this game. You start to see corpses, and it defines it as an essential component. Uh, Constantly making you question whether like what happened here to leave me the only one alive, or am
Mm,
I hallucinating all this?
yeah,
I talked about how much I love the opening, but rowing in, seeing all those corpses amidst a beautiful, glowing morning environment. And the last comment I want to make is the imagery of that horse head hell,
still
like
yeah,
always rising above your final goal, and you could
right.
keep catching glimpses of it when you were working your way back from the gods and feeling like you were getting closer. Just really wonderful.
Yeah, special shout out to the world made of flesh. That was
Yeah,
truly,
maybe the
truly,
most direct, emblematic image of hell, like traditional hell, like we would see it. Senua has to wade through a river of blood with arms reaching and grazing her, closing
it
in
was
around
so
her.
horrifying.
Really horrifying, and screaming, twisted, mutilated bodies.
Yeah.
Don't play it if you don't like that shit, because there's a lot
And
of
part of
it.
the reason the segment where you're collecting the shards of the swords was my favorite is because it takes you to like five different beautiful areas, all extraordinarily different, from like a dark and eerie swamp to a castle
Yeah,
in a downpour or a castle on a beautiful day to this like labyrinth where you're just following the light and the darkness and learning more about your father. You just got to go to so many cool places, and they were all short and sweet. And it's not an open world game. It's like a linear based.
yeah.
It's like
Funny,
almost a
it is still
hub.
on the it's on the rails, like all the other games we've talked about, but we haven't talked about that at all. Like it just didn't occur to me because I was so into the game. Like I never felt the walls. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
no, it
funny
was
how that
normally like a
translates.
hub with a couple segments for you to go out to,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it was not at all overwhelming, which I appreciate in today's age of video games.
Mhm.
All right, have we praised the game enough?
We've turned it over. Yeah.
This
Gosh.
game is really something,
Yeah.
and
Game good.
yeah, I tried to play a game of after this one, the game Spiritfarer on my Switch. And that's a beautiful game, but I just found myself thinking about this game and wishing I was like experiencing more of it, even though it was like a stressful experience.
It constantly blows me away how the game that we end up playing somehow seems totally fucking agnostic of the size, budget, or background of the developer that made it. Like, if this tiny team can make a fucking dunker like this, and game, like, we should expect so much out of these studios with gigantic budgets. It's all the more reason to like not pre-order your fucking games. And
Right. Well, it just kind of
hold their feet to the
they
fire.
picked a lane and they crushed it, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of people refer to this last generation as the open world generation, and I tend to agree with that. And they didn't bite off more than they could chew. They picked an amount that they could
Manage.
craft up to their standards, and they did exactly that. And
They chose concrete goals exactly, and,
Ev-
realized those, and
everything
the result.
came up Millhouse.
I would like to compare it a little bit to Firewatch, not in a very like a very high level, because
So similar.
Firewatch is also like a story-driven game, and I don't know. I would like to compare their budget. I don't really know what they are, but the my overall point is that Firewatch doesn't fucking compare to this game. Like, and
I would
I know
agree with that.
I know they're really different, but from the beginning point, I know that maybe we could give Firewatch some slack for like being, and I did like Firewatch too, which should tell you about the strength of this game. Like, and I know we could give Firewatch some slack, saying like, well, they're apples and oranges, we can't compare them. But I think that is doing a disservice to Ninja Theory, because I think they just had such inspiration. Like, they had a really, this is just what makes good art, is a really fucking good idea at the end of the day. And they wrapped it in a really wonderful atmosphere, and they never really kind of misstepped with their creative choices. So
It's true. They kind of
props to
tackled two things at one time. They had the idea, and they also wrapped it in that veneer of Norse mythology that was super cool and interesting on its own right, ignoring the way that they tied it into Psychosis being incredible on its own right. Like I said, like, if you want to be a complete ignorant tool and only play this as some sort of God of War inspired, this came out before God of War, didn't it?
I don't know. I think
I'm pretty sure it did. I'm pretty sure I looked this up because I was curious, and I was like, actually, God of War copied Hellblade.
Look it up while I comment that another.
Yeah, it came out in 2017, and God of War came out in 2018.
That's funny. I think that Firewatch is maybe a slightly weaker game, just because I don't know. I think that their ambition was a little bit less. Maybe there are other constraining factors here, but Hellblade was a risky game. Like, this is not. First of all, the subject matter is taboo in a huge amount of places, and even now in the most kind of open-minded possible space that it could be heard in. Like, it's still risky commercially and critically. And because they kind of took their time and were very painstaking, I think that their ambitious move was rewarded. And I really like when people kind of push the limits like that. And Firewatch was a safer bet. Yeah, that's all I'll say on that.
Yeah, I don't have much else to say. I think this is my favorite game that we've played so far as part of this review series.
For sure, by a
which is kind of crazy because we just happened to pick it because I got screwed by my online retailer for Golden Sun. But it's like, how many games like this are out there that just aren't household names and are like mind-blowingly life-changing experiences that tackle topics that aren't often even looked at.
Next time we're looking at for a new game, I would like to look for something that is provocative from a gameplay perspective. A lot of our games,
Peter's like, I'm done with the stories.
We've played a lot of them.
We've played some intense games. Like,
we played some provocative narrative and atmospheric games, but nothing has really grabbed me from a
Mega Man Battle Network 3 is the answer.
I get to play Mega Man Battle Network 3 now, everybody.
Why are you sad?
I'm not. You said I was sad. I didn't say I was sad at all.
That game is
It's
so
funny because I'm
good.
playing a fuck ton of Slay the Spire recently, which is
Oh,
like
interesting.
very similar
Similar to what?
to Mega Man Battle Network.
What?
They're similar. They're very similar games in terms of
I've
gameplay.
watched Slay the Spire. I mean, I know I loosely described Battle Network as a deck building game, but you're controlling a character while you do your battles.
Yeah, that's true. Let's review Senua though. Let's
Whoa,
see.
no, this is turning into a you have to play Battle Network right now so we can talk about it.
It's mostly because Patrick gets to play Golden Sun at the same time, which I'm obsessed with. So
Yeah, he's
I'm always
super.
every time I'm like, this game isn't as good as Golden Sun.
Yeah, I've got look. We're ready. Oh, you can't see, but I've got my SP
Imagine
ready. Golden Sun.
having, yeah,
I can't fucking wait. Tomorrow's the day.
we're ready. Okay, so Hellblade, I think we need like a thermometer on the screen that's like hot or not, fire or ice, with your head at the top and mine at the bottom.
We can work on that. Well, I'll talk to my our video guy, me.
Yeah,
I
but
know.
Hellblade is hot fire. Bye, bye, bye.
Yeah.
I would like our
Sell GameStop, buy
Jim
Hellblade.
Cramer as I can.
No, Jim Cramer can suck a dick. uh,
um,
Anywho, so
go
what?
first. You go first.
I go first. All right. So I've actually already reviewed the game because I have my own spreadsheet where I track the games I've played this year.
Oh, that's cool. I
And
don't have
my final grade is an A minus. And I think it is really close to perfect. I think my complaint about it kind of showing its hand for combat a little too early is my biggest gripe, on top of just some of the theme or some of the metaphor getting lost a little bit. Like I was saying, the what in Senua's world are the gods and Hela actually represented by? Like, I
that.
know we
Yeah,
want I know we want this journey to be like rooted in realism, but and a lot of it works, but there's some small parts that don't quite work for me, and that's okay because they did it about as well as they could for what they were trying to do. And a perfect grade, an A or A plus is really hard to achieve.
yeah.
And at the end of the day,
I
I
think these are great criticisms. I think this is very
I,
good.
I love the game, but it is also like a stressful.
Yeah,
Like it can be
that
hard to
game's
play
for a
through at
reason.
times, and
Yeah,
like when I'm excited or not excited, but like need a break from it because of its intensity, it feels unfair to call that a criticism, but I'm nitpicking, right? I have to,
yeah.
as I say, I need to pick some nits on these games, and it's kind of miraculous that for a game like this, that's all I can complain about. And I have some mixed feelings about the whole "if you die, you get permadeath" thing because of the guilt I had to live with after Googling it and revealing the answer to myself. But um, overall, this game's amazing. This game's
Yeah.
amazing. I almost wanted more of it. I am curious to see what they'll do
Well,
with
I
a
got news for
sequel.
you.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what they do with a sequel.
It's in Iceland. That's
But
all I think that we
it's
know.
kind of this game is stunning on pretty much every aspect that we talk about, and it was a hell of a find. It was a hell of a find. I recommend it to everyone.
Thank you. I'll accept your direct
Yeah, good
compliment
job. Good job.
after my investigative work.
What about you?
I am actually also going to give this game an A minus.
Look at that.
You may have expected higher from me because
No,
I
that
did
sounds
take
about
your
right.
critique on
You
it.
almost sounded like you had more criticisms than I did.
Really? Oh, I think it's a tremendous game. I wish we had. I wish that many studios would really follow the lead that Ninja Theory has set. I think that this game has. I will say, I think it has capped out how a lot of the aspects of how strong a narrative and an atmosphere can be,
Hmm.
as well as real world implications, and pushing what you think can happen with a video game.
Hmm.
However, I think the gameplay is kind of partly holds it back from those two higher tiers in terms of grading for me. This is the same criticism I have from Firewatch. And while all of those things are stellar that I mentioned before, this is still a game. And for as we get higher into the like more crucible levels of grading here, you really need compelling gameplay that you can continue to sink time into, and that keeps you thinking and that keeps you wanting to play. Certainly,
I think the
um,
combat hit that for me, and
not me. It really did cap out for me in terms of how satisfied I guess I felt natively limited by the opportunities to have combat that the game afforded to you. This is nothing against the game. It's capped out by the scope of the game by being a 10-hour linear kind of you play through this. You have, I don't know, set number of combats that you can do.
yeah, I will
And
say,
and me not liking puzzles that much also like
yeah,
limits this a little.
I will say in regards to the combat. So I was about to compare it to something like Katana Zero, where you don't have much. Like there are abilities, you don't
Yeah,
gain abilities. It's the
it's like a
same thing,
scenario that you
but
need to play through.
the difference is pretty much all of the scenarios for Senua play out the same, right?
Yeah.
Like isolate one person, hack him down, isolate the next person. Whereas
Yes.
in something like Katana Zero, you're allowed to play with the environment and approach things in different ways. And I don't think this offered any
That is
diversity
precisely what I am saying.
into how you approach a combat scenario.
The diversity that you're mentioning being missing is a big deal for me.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain this because you're right that the combat is simple. However, it didn't feel that bad. Like playing the simple combat, it did feel weirdly satisfying. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
perfectly right, but it's still simple.
Yeah.
There aren't that many ways you can skin this cat, and uh,
Jesus.
not just complexity, but I don't know, a
No,
certain
I
kind
get
of
what you're
color
saying.
variety. I guess yeah, is something I really look for in a perfect
Every
game.
combat scenario did play out the same, and it was. I think the point of the combat was more to like progress your confidence in yourself and to push through into the next story beat rather than here have this
Yeah.
experience that is fun and engaging and is
Mhm.
why we made the game. So I get that
lest we
complaint.
forget lest we forget gameplay is the most like infinitely potential area of
Mm,
video games. I was talking about Slay the Spire a minute ago, and that game, like the gameplay of that game, is like unbelievably replayable, and there's endless configurations, and it's not even that complex of a premise.
yeah,
So remembering the ceiling of this is something that is knocking it down that tiny bit for me.
yeah, fair enough. Checks out.
Got a good situation for you coming in on Golden Sun.
Yeah,
Let's see
like
what
Peter
happens
said,
with
this
that.
next month he'll be crushing some Mega Man Battle Network 3, and I'll be diving into Golden Sun for the first time. I have no idea what to expect. Maybe there's some sort of monsters that you level up, is what I kind of gathered from the saves that were on this game that I deleted. They were like, "You're
Yes, the monsters, the
this
little
little sprite
monsters.
is level 9 or whatever."
Do you recognize those monsters, Patrick, at
One
all? Ever
one
seen any of those
I've
before?
seen one of them, and it may be in this video right this moment.
I use
Yeah,
the genie from Golden Sun as my avatar on
yeah. I
Steam.
guess it's just gonna be kind of your typical JRPG turn-based combat, but I'm excited for it. I'm excited to hunker under my bed sheets and play my Game Boy into the
With
wee
the
hours of the
worm
night.
light, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, I've got an SP baby. That shit's backlit.
Oh my gosh, I have a DS Lite. I don't even have a Game Boy Advance anymore.
Yeah, well, it sucks to be you, but
Sucks to suck.
it
At
we are
least we don't have psychosis.
yeah, we are both blessed on this day because we get to play more awesome games in the coming month. But this was a fun one. This was a cool game, one of the coolest experiences I've had. I'm glad that we got to do it. And I look
Yes,
forward to our next discussion.
me too.
All right, until next time, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, my friend. And I look forward to picking all of your thoughts on Proto Man and Guts Man and all the men.
Adieu. Parting is such sweet sorrow.
All right, Peter, talk to you later.